In the heart of a meticulously ordered city, where the buildings stood tall and gleamed like polished teeth in the stark sunlight, there lived a man named David. He was an unassuming character, a cog in the well-oiled machine that was society. His days were a monotonous blur of work and sleep, punctuated only by the mechanical chirp of his alarm clock and the rhythmic patter of his shoes against the concrete. David's eyes, once a vibrant blue, had faded to a dull gray, reflecting the lifelessness of his surroundings. His hair, once a rich brown, had thinned and turned the color of ash. Yet there was something about him that suggested a hidden reservoir of strength, a secret spark that had not yet been extinguished. David worked as a janitor in a labyrinthine office building. His job was to clean up the mess of the day so that the employees could arrive each morning to a fresh canvas of gleaming floors and spotless desks. It was a task he performed with an almost obsessive thoroughness, as if by erasing the physical evidence of human imperfection, he could somehow purge the imperfections from within himself. The office workers barely registered his presence, their eyes glazed over by screens and paperwork, nodding curtly as he wheeled his cleaning cart through the corridors. They were too preoccupied with the cerebral mazes of their own lives to notice the quiet dignity with which he moved through his. The building was a labyrinth of steel and glass, a bastion of order in a world that had grown too large for the people it contained. David knew every corner, every hidden nook where the cleaning droids couldn't reach, every smudge that seemed to reappear no matter how often he wiped it away. His routine was as much a part of the building's rhythm as the hum of the air conditioning and the click of the elevator doors. Yet, there was one room he had never been allowed to clean, a room that remained locked and shrouded in mystery, no matter the time of day or night. It was a small office on the top floor, accessible only by a single, nondescript elevator that seemed to operate on its own schedule. Curiosity gnawed at him like a persistent itch, a stark contrast to the apathy that had become second nature. The whispers of his colleagues grew louder with each passing day, speaking of strange experiments and dark secrets concealed within those walls. David's curiosity grew into an obsession, and he found himself lingering outside the elevator, waiting for the moment when it would ascend, revealing the path to the forbidden room. He watched as the numbers ticked upwards, the doors opening and closing without him daring to step inside, his heart thumping in his chest like a wild animal seeking escape. One fateful night, the elevator malfunctioned. The doors remained open, inviting him with an eerie stillness that seemed to echo the silence of the empty halls. The digital display above the elevator flickered with a message. Floor 33. Authorized access only. He stepped inside, his breath shallow and his palms slick with sweat. The buttons were cold to the touch, but his trembling hand pressed the one labeled 33. The doors closed with a solemn finality, and the car jolted to life, climbing towards the unknown. The elevator groaned and creaked as it ascended, each floor feeling like an eternity. When it reached the top, the doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a corridor bathed in a sickly green light. The walls were lined with one-way glass, and David could see shadowy figures moving beyond, their forms distorted by the thick panes. His heart hammered in his chest as he stepped out into the corridor, the echoes of his footsteps seemingly swallowed by the thick carpet beneath his feet. The air was stale and heavy, tinged with the faint smell of antiseptic and something else, something that sent a shiver down his spine. The room at the end of the hall was unmarked, but the hum of machinery was unmistakable. His hand hovered over the handle, his mind racing with thoughts of what horrors lay behind it. He pushed the door open, and the sight before him was like nothing he had ever seen. Rows upon rows of pods filled the space, each one holding a person in a deep, unnatural slumber. Their faces were serene, almost angelic, but their eyes were wide open and unseeing, staring blankly into the void. They were alive, yet not living, suspended, in a state of existence that was both disturbing and fascinating. David's breath caught in his throat as he approached the nearest pod. The person inside was a woman, her features beautiful yet lifeless. He reached out to touch the glass, and in that instant, her eyes flickered with a glimmer of consciousness. The terror that filled him was indescribable, a cold, clammy hand gripping his heart. He stumbled back, his mind reeling as he tried to comprehend the reality of what he had just witnessed. The room was a prison of nightmares, a testament to the depths of humanity's hunger for power and knowledge. His eyes darted around, searching for answers, but finding only more questions. The sudden sound of footsteps snapped him out of his trance. He spun around to find a group of figures in lab coats approaching, their faces obscured by surgical masks. "You shouldn't be here," one of them said, their voice cold and detached. David knew that his world was about to change, that he had stumbled upon a truth so profound that it would either destroy him or set him free from the chains of his mundane existence. His heart pounded as he backed away from the pods, the echo of his own steps joining the ominous crescendo of the pursuing footsteps. He had to make a choice: flee and hope to warn others of the horrors he had seen, or succumb to the same fate as the souls trapped in the glass prisons before him. The decision was made for him as a hand clamped down on his shoulder, spinning him around to face the unknown. The world grew fuzzy around the edges, and he felt a sharp prick at the base of his neck. The last thing he remembered was the cold, unfeeling gaze of the scientist as his vision faded to black. When David awoke, he was lying on a cold metal table, the bright lights above blurring into a harsh, glaring blob. His limbs were bound, and his mouth was dry, tasting of metal. Panic surged through him, but it was quickly replaced by a strange, numbing calm. He knew he was in the belly of the beast now. The lab coat-clad figures hovered over him, their faces still obscured, but their eyes gleaming with a sinister curiosity. They spoke in hushed tones, using a language that was both foreign and eerily familiar, as if it was a dialect of the nightmares that had long plagued his sleep. One of them stepped forward, holding a syringe filled with a glowing amber liquid. "Don't be afraid," the voice said, and despite the horror, David felt his body relax against his will. The needle pierced his skin, and the liquid burned as it traveled through his veins, filling him with a warmth that grew to an unbearable heat. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he felt his consciousness slipping away down into a vortex of oblivion. The world around him shifted, the cold metal of the table giving way to a warm, fluid embrace. He was floating in a sea of darkness, the only light coming from the pods that lined the walls. The people inside looked at him with pleading eyes, their silent cries for help resonating in his soul. They were not just random test subjects. They were his neighbors, his friends, his family. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. This was not just a personal nightmare. This was a collective horror that had ensnared everyone he had ever known. The warmth grew into a feverish heat, and David felt himself being pulled into the depths of the pods, his essence merging with the others. A scream tore through the silence, and he realized it was his own. The world around him began to distort, the pods stretching and twisting into monstrous shapes that danced and writhed in the shadows. The faces of the trapped individuals contorted into expressions of pain and despair, their silent cries now a cacophony of anguish that filled his ears. As the room swirled around him, David made a silent vow to somehow escape this hellish place and expose the truth to the world. The pods grew closer, the edges of his vision fading to black. He could feel himself slipping away, becoming one with the experiment, but that hidden spark within him, that reservoir of strength, grew brighter, fueled by anger and determination. He focused on it, willing it to burn through the fog in his mind. And then, with a final surge of energy, David wrenched free from the table, tearing the restraint off his wrists. The figures in lab coats recoiled in surprise, their grip on him loosening just enough for him to break free. He stumbled towards the elevator, the pod's wails of despair following him like a mournful chorus. The doors slammed shut behind him, and he collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The elevator descended, the numbers on the display racing downward, and David knew that his escape was just the beginning of a much larger battle. The world outside the building had not changed. The same stark sunlight and gleaming buildings, greeting him with a bizarre sense of normalcy. But David's eyes had been opened to the grotesque truth beneath the surface, and he knew that he could never return to his old life. The whispers of his colleagues had been more than mere rumors. They had been cries for help that had gone unheard. Now, it was up to him to tear down the walls of this twisted utopia and set the captives free from their endless slumber. He walked the streets, a man with a mission that burned in his very core. His mind raced with plans of sabotage and rebellion, the faces of the trapped souls etched into his memory. Each step he took was fueled by the hope that he could somehow save them. Yet, the more he learned, the more he realized the extent of the conspiracy. The leaders of the city were not just conducting experiments. They were harvesting the very essence of humanity, feeding on the fear and despair of their subjects to maintain their own power. David's first move was to gather allies, people who had also begun to question the strange occurrences in their lives. They formed a small, clandestine group, sharing whispers in alleyways and passing notes under the cover of darkness. They called themselves the Awakened, bound together by the horror of what they knew and the fierce desire to bring the truth to light. Each member had their own story, their own encounter with the monsters that lurked in the shadows of the gleaming city. The Awakened grew in numbers, and with each new recruit came more information. They discovered that the experiment was not confined to a single room on the 33rd floor. It was a web that stretched throughout the city, reaching into the highest echelons of power. The elevator that had taken him to the Chamber of Horrors was just one of many, each leading to a different level of the labyrinth that made up the true face of the city. They plotted and schemed, each member using their own skills to infiltrate different facets of the operation. Some gathered intel, while others worked on hacking the systems that kept the pods operational. They knew that they were being watched, that the eyes of their captors were everywhere. Yet, they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the fate of their loved ones rested on their shoulders. One night, as a full moon cast eerie shadows across the city, the Awakened launched their attack. David led the charge, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. They stormed the building, dodging the robotic sentinels that patrolled the halls. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the machinery, a constant reminder of what was at stake. They reached the control room, and David slammed his hand down on the master switch, plunging the room into darkness. The pod's lights flickered and went out, the screams of the trapped individuals silenced. The Awakened held their breath, waiting for the moment when the first pod would open and reveal if their efforts had been in vain. David's pod cracked open with a hiss, and a figure emerged, blinking in the sudden light. It was his sister, Rachel. Her eyes, once filled with despair, now gleamed with hope. The city had been thrown into chaos. The Awakened had struck a blow to the heart of the experiment, but the battle was far from over. The lab, coat-clad figures had not disappeared. They had merely retreated into the shadows, biding their time. David and Rachel stood among the wreckage, their eyes meeting. They knew that the path ahead was fraught with danger, but together, with their newfound family, they would fight to free the minds and spirits of their city from the clutches of the monsters that sought to control them. The story of their rebellion spread like wildfire, whispered in the dead of night and etched into the walls of the city in the light of the following days. The people began to question the world around them, to see beyond the gleaming facade to the rotten core beneath. And as the Awakened grew stronger, so too did the fear of the ones who had held them captive. The city was changing, its very fabric torn apart by the revelation of the dark truth. The battle lines were drawn, and the war for freedom had begun. Each member of the Awakened had their own reason to fight, their own personal hell to conquer. Yet, united by their shared nightmare, they stood firm, ready to face whatever lay ahead. For they knew that in the end, it was not just their lives that were at stake, but the very essence of what it meant to be human.